overview of regulatory happenings across Asia Pacific.
Thank you, Trudy, for the introduction, and delighted to be here at Sigma in Manila. And thank you very much for all being here first up this morning. I'm sure you're going to find the actual conference illuminating with a number of experts, as Trudy mentioned. And this session, we are very lucky to be attended by a number of experts, industry experts from various entities to give you their views in respect of developments in Asia. And there'll be room at the end for questions to be asked. As Trudy mentioned, I'm Jamie Nettleton. I'm a partner of Addisons in Sydney. I've been involved in gambling regulation for the last 25 years. And in that capacity, I was also the president of the International Masters of Gaming Law, taking into account developments globally, and spoken at a number of conferences, but never one before in Manila. So I'm delighted to be here. I'm going to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves, and then we'll start with a series of questions. Stan, if you could introduce yourself, please.
Good morning, all. My name is Stanislav Cech. I work for Sportradar. I have been looking after operations, and I have been at the birth of managed trading services that have grown and also form now big part of the data that are used for regulatory purposes and supporting services of the federations and ensuring integrity in sports.
My name is Harmen Brenninkmeijer. I run a company called NYCE. We effectively represent 32 different companies in the gaming industry today. It's increasing basically on a monthly basis. We have a large sales team across the world, so we represent a lot of products globally. We're either in the land-based iGaming or in the lottery sector. Where we're focused on is trying to find effectively the rough diamonds, the very interesting opportunities, companies that have products that you normally don't find as easily, that we then can present to the operators across the world and basically give them leverage in order to get going on their sales side. By getting to know the companies really well, we automatically will get an insight how well they're run, and then we might make an investment, or we might help them to get an investment going into their company. So we're basically full circle trying to get a lot of, let's say, interesting new technology to come into the industry and build that out. Thank you.
Hi, good morning everyone. I'm Michael Charlton. I've been in the industry for 27 years now, rivaling Harmen in the amount of time we're at this.
32.
32, I'm 5 years behind Harmen, catching up though. And I've been based in Asia for the last 18 years, most of that in Beijing, but also traveling around in various other territories, trying to grow the originally Ladbrokes business, then Ladbrokes Coral business, now what we're called is Entain. So my job is business development for the APAC region for Entain, which is looking for regulated opportunities, primarily in the sports betting industry.
And thank you, Michael. It's going to be very interesting to come back to you. We're going to be looking at various jurisdictions from a top-down, bottom-up approach, which indicates some of the challenges which are faced currently in regulatory developments in all parts of Asia. It's something we're familiar with in respect of jurisdictions like Australia, the United States, and also in respect of Europe. Before we talk about individual jurisdictions, I'm going to ask Stan to talk about some of the developments on much more of a cross-country perspective in respect of arrangements with sporting federations across Asia to improve integrity across sports.
So, as you might be aware, Sportradar has been working in the integrity of sports for the last over 18 years, and it was one of the key contributors in the industry, where our team focus on ensuring that the sports are played fairly. These added sort of it evolved with the development of managed trading services, where we had much closer view on the data, where we could much closer follow irregularity in a betting, where you had a certain patterns, and ensuring that this has been, stopped and actions were taken, against the responsible. If I give you a few examples, probably the latest one was two major snooker players were banned for life as a result of wrongdoing, together with 8 other snooker players. Is something that was, done on the back of long-term investigations and really ensuring that there is a fairness. And the integrated part, really, it comes before the regulation, and it comes, it's very important to ensure that there is no misunderstanding, no wrongdoing, and it gives fair chance to all the players how to proceed. The importance of data, the importance of knowledge, the importance of the experience in this business is can be understated.
Okay, Stan, thank you for that. I think Michael, might be useful if you perhaps can talk about this in but not just in respect of the use of data, but perhaps more in connection with some of the regulatory developments in countries like Malaysia, and really looking at, if you like, trying to put in place regulatory systems which may look at sports betting, and also in respect of ensuring proper use of data.
So what my company Entain has decided to do is focus purely on the regulated markets around the world, and we've committed as a board to only operating in regulated markets around the world from the end of this year, which, as any of us based in Asia know, is quite the challenge if your job is business development in regulated markets, because there ain't many regulated markets in Asia, outside maybe Hong Kong, which is exclusive to the Hong Kong Jockey Club, Singapore, exclusive to Singapore pools. So we're scratching around looking for other opportunities, and then trying to figure out a way to help those markets regulate. Because I think there's a general willingness amongst governments to regulate and establish legitimate tax income from sports betting. I think most governments we talk to accept that that is a great way of growing economies in places like Malaysia, Japan, Vietnam, that have struggled since COVID. However, we've also got, as we all know here, and I'm sure maybe a few of us here even benefit from, well-established grey market operators for whom it's definitely not in their interest to regulate the markets. So that's this sort of river we're trying to traverse along here. So looking specifically at the markets, because they are all unique, the government structure, the customs of the country, the attitudes to gambling and betting are all unique. So you have to, I think, look at specifics when it comes to considering the regulations. So if you look at places like Malaysia, I think, Jamie, was the first one you asked about. So Malaysia is very interesting, because you've got the Prime Minister Ibrahim saying that actually sports betting could be a great way of growing the economy. I'm talking in horrible generalities here, so please bear with me, but that's in the now 17 minutes we have left, about as much depth as I can go into. Please contact me after if you want to get into any of these markets in any more depth. But Malaysia, the Prime Minister says, okay, this would be great. Let's accept that there is a big grey market out there, and maybe we can grow the economy by regulating it. But then when we talk to levels below that, and Stan, I believe you're talking at maybe a federation level, I think the lower level politicians accept that it's never quite that easy. And therefore, even if you've got the willingness from the very top to regulate things like sports betting, it's still going to be a long, hard regulation process to actually get to that point with an unknown timeline. So I'm lucky that Entain has said, look, we accept that the size of the prize, the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, is worth the investment, the time, the resources that it's going to take to get there.
And I think Malaysia is a very good introduction. It's got very archaic laws in respect of gambling regulation, a recognition that if there is going to be some form of regulatory system, it almost needs to be started from scratch in respect of the development, and the interaction that needs to take place, not just on the cultural level, but also in respect of what's appropriately going to be regulated at the federal level as against the provincial level, gives rise to all forms of challenge, which takes a considerable time to put into place. And in the meantime, you have the continued grey market, the continued enforcement of archaic laws, and difficulties in understanding the environment. Harmen, I think if you perhaps talk to another jurisdiction in light of this that you're familiar with, perhaps we can talk about something like Vietnam, and then we'll move on to other jurisdictions shortly thereafter.
Well, Michael already mentioned something about Vietnam, that they're interested in regulating the sports betting and such, etc. But when they started to come out with a potential tender, or at least try to get, let's say, some interest from the industry, nobody was really interested, under those conditions that they basically came up with, because of the size of the minimum bets, the maximum bets, based on who could gamble, how they had to prove the level of income, etc., etc. So that was just a non-starter. And I think I want to talk about something a little bit more generic. I've been extremely vocal for the last 15 years about the fact that Asia needs to get it together. Okay, it has taken Europe a very long time. So I'm not going to read Asia its lesson, because Europe is not a good example. And specifically my country, the Netherlands. Okay, the Netherlands basically introduced finally a law related to online gaming 3 years ago, started giving out a lot of licenses, etc., and it became extremely messy. As of July 1st, just a couple of days ago, they basically banned all advertising. So the initial people that received the license were having, they were basically on top, and Entain, had a major advantage to that, because they bought one of the, number one, let's say, operators in the Netherlands. But now everybody getting a new license is in a very difficult position trying to gain market share. Europe is not a good example, but Europe is an example. It's an example that the taxation that it brings is massive. The money that it brings into the coffers of the governments is substantial. That's the lesson that Asia needs to take. It needs to find its own way how it's going to do that. There are a lot of grey market operators. There were a lot of grey market operators in Europe, and they basically had to, abstain for applying for a license for 3 years, 5 years, whatever the case might be, and suddenly they can. I believe the most important thing to the Asian market is that they need to find a way to make it happen. The Philippines has been a pretty good example in how to go about it. It's not perfect, not by a long shot. The Philippines need to improve in many areas. Needs to improve in the fact that even trying to get equipment into this country is not clear how to do so. It's clear if you buy the equipment going into a property, but it's not very clear if, let's say, you want to import equipment in order to show it around, being it here on a SIGMA show, or being it in general to get people to basically test the equipment. There are many issues in the Philippines that need to improve. I believe that the present administration and the chairman and let's say the management backcourt has always been aware of this, and they're trying to do something about it. In my opinion, humble opinion, it could be a lot faster, but given that is what it is, it at least has a bit of a strategy and a bit of a vision as to where it's going. Now we're going to see that we're going to have a privatization, we're going to have a separation of powers, if everything goes well. Obviously it will go to the locals. Again, a very Asian, approach. Let's talk about Thailand. Thailand, at the moment, as long as Pita is not going to get into the Prime Minister's position, as long as the way forward is not going to be in power, is going to get casinos, in my opinion. It's not going to be casinos run or managed by foreigners. It is going to be local. And it's going to be quite substantial. It's going to bring money to the coffers of, let's say, the government. It's going to be good for the Thai economy. But is it going to be as professional as it should be, as, for example, Singapore have shown that they could do, Macau, for that matter also the Philippines? I don't think so. We'll see where it goes, but something is going to happen in Thailand as long as the present administration is able to, let's say, maintain its majority and get back into power. So overall, I'd say Asia needs to get its act together.
And Harmen, when you're making those comments, you're looking at it at least in relation to Thailand. I'm sure you make the same comments in Japan in respect of regulatory developments in respect of IRs and the casinos, but obviously looking at it more from the Entain perspective, we're looking at a much broader scope. Is it appropriate that it be a soft entry into the regulatory system by each country just looking at one aspect of gambling, or is it something that should be much more like the UK approach, which is to have an across-the-board regulatory system to allow gambling regulation in respect of all disciplines? How would you go about it if you're looking at this in other countries in Asia which are starting to look at the issue for the first time?
So many years ago, I wrote a plan for the Colombian government. They were asking me, how do we get from 125 million taken by government on taxation on gaming to 750 million? So I wrote a business plan for the government, paid for by the government, and for its gaming commission, in order to look at it from a business perspective. I'm not the legal guy. I leave that up to my colleague here moderating. But from a business perspective, there is a way to do it. But you're absolutely right. Start with one thing and then build up. Absolutely. If you want to do everything at once, almost impossible. So start with something, and obviously, sitting with my two colleagues on the left and the right, let's start with sports betting because it's the easiest to go with. And money-wise, it is by far the largest amount of bets being taken.
And so, with that introduction, Michael, that sports betting should be the first part, and I must admit I haven't actually seen that much in Asia or in any country I'm familiar with where sports betting, in fact, has been the first form of gambling to be licensed. Now, what is the approach that should be made with some of the jurisdictions which haven't engaged? They have a significant grey market, that's known. How can they be encouraged to put in place online, or are we also talking about terrestrial regulation for sports betting?
I mean, it's a huge question because there is no right model of doing this. It depends where you're starting from. And some of these places have virtually no regulations at all. And other places, for example, the Philippines, as Harmen's mentioned, have now the PIGO system, which is actually a good start, but needs further work. The Vietnam decree that, again, Harmen mentioned, the 2017 decree, has actually been a work in progress since the 1970s. So they've been working for 50 years to try and get a sports betting decree passed, and it's getting close. You know, we've waited a long time for it, but the National Assembly in Vietnam met in May, and they've approved the procurement process to allow a legitimate RFP to be issued for sports betting in Vietnam. That said, we also understand that there are other routes where people are looking for other ways around the regulations to still get a license in Vietnam without having to go through the formal procedure. So there is no hard and fast model, is what I'm saying, Jamie. You look at Japan, and Japan's had a tough experience with the IRs, but it doesn't mean they're not looking at regulating sports betting. It just means that it's much harder for the politicians to be seen to be supporting something in the betting and gaming world when a lot of people have been burned by their experience of IRs. So, I mean, I can talk about individual territories, but in the time we have, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. And I think the illustration from those markets which have been regulated for a significant period of time, Harmen's touched on the Dutch experience, which, if you like, is quite different to what was initially proposed as being introduced. If you look at it from other markets, it's a bit like with the initial licensing system for sports betting, it is essentially, carte blanche. In other words, it's like the Wild West. It is an open market, very limited restrictions in respect of the promotion, very limited harm minimization controls, yet the rest of the world is coming out with reports such as in my country, which has indicated that a lot of the sports betting activities taking place is not sufficiently regulated and requires stricter and stricter controls, which ends up with a knee-jerk reaction such as that in Holland and other parts of Europe with the advertising prohibitions.
I mean, it's impossible to get it right from the start. There's no doubt about it. And when you start, you have to basically start refining it. But what you have to do is you have to understand, what is the target? Target is what? Taxation, minimization of, let's say, problems within society. Is it because you want to fight, let's say, the extensive cash flow moving in and out of the country? Take all of these things in consideration. All of them have very different impacts. So none of these can be just taken isolated and say, like, I have a solution for this, and when I do this, and I do that, and I do that, then everything will be resolved. No country in the world can prove that. Even in the United States, where more and more is being regulated, I can tell you that the amount of black market gambling in the United States is still staggeringly high. And it is amazing that, you know, the government, even of, let's say, a nature of the United States with, you know, all its order-based, you know, examples and agencies, etc., that are tracking things down, they are not able to control it. So, you know, God forbid for any smaller country, right? The biggest issue that we need to do all together is basically be responsible. Number one, that's us as the industry, as, you know, foremost our responsibility. And two, to basically start working with the regulators in order to get at least something at a minimum level so that we can all eat from it and not just a few. Now, obviously, I speak against, you know, the larger conglomerates, but I believe that this is quite important. That's why I'm a firm believer of a level of decentralization within gaming, but that's a whole different discussion.
Stan, I'm going to come back to you in a minute with a question in respect of another focus in respect of regulation, which is in respect of essentially trying to target criminal activity, particularly in respect of the products which may be permitted to be conducted in respect of sports betting. But before I do so, I realise we're running out of time. Do we have any questions for the panel? Please feel free to pose any questions.
Hello, this is Michael Grimes from the award-winning news outlet GTR Asia. Hello, Harmen. Hello. My question, because I only came in partway through, and you were talking about Malaysia. And one thing that always struck me about Malaysia, forgive me if you've already touched on this, but my understanding is that Genting Highlands, Resorts World Genting, is still only operating on a quarterly rolling license. So if that's still the case, what possible hope can there be for regulated sports betting or other online betting in Malaysia?
We did cover that at the beginning. Yeah, so what we said, we talked generally about Malaysia and just said that the Prime Minister has made very positive noises about regulating the industry as a whole, but it's going to be more challenging than that. So if you talk to the lower levels of government, they accept that there's a willingness from the top to do it, but it will be hard to change the regulations individually. So we can chat later.
Thank you for the personal recap. Okay, thank you. Sorry. Any further questions to the man? I'm sorry, it's very hard to see through the lights. Sorry, one here on the right.
Hi, I'm an engineer from the startup company, very small. I just want to ask you guys, like, what is the thing related to like a geolocation when we want to get a license from the government? Do they like require to have the technology to do the geolocation to like not let the user come from the outside and then only play from the inside the country?
I mean, they should. Okay, that's what's happening in the United States, right? Per state. So you have to make sure that, for example, you take bets from within the state, right? You have to have the local number, and then when you have the local number, you have to take the bets from within the state. The technology is there, can absolutely refine and done to perfection. So in that sense, if Asia starts looking at proper regulations, it absolutely should consider that. And you can do it, you know, within meters, right, from the border areas, etc. So specifically, you know, in areas like, you know, Cambodia, Thailand, Vietnam, you know, that
consideration of, let's say, how gambling takes place, I think is extremely important. And it would deal with the problems in Myanmar, etc. In my view, if you look at how Asia needs to start regulating its gaming, it needs to really focus upon the technology available today in order to at least get the basics in place. Everything is there. Asia has often jumped technology-wise over many others. It can do it again, and definitely within gaming.
Can I have a follow-up question? Then, do you have any recommend if like a company they develop the technology related to geolocation, or should we use any other provider?
No, the technology is there. There are several providers of that technology that can be built into any platform today.
Do you have any recommend to use like a provider or vendor for the geolocation?
Let's speak privately.
Yeah,
okay.
I was going to say, I'm sure we've all got our friends who can do this. So yeah, approach us after. I'll give you a name. Harmen will give you a different name.
Yeah, thank you.
Stan will give you a different
thank
name.
you.
We can do that later.
Hi, good morning. I'd like to ask for your insights regarding India. I believe that they've passed laws, and I think that they're opening up as well. And with regards to your statement that Asia needs to get it together, can you think of any models from matured markets that can be used as examples? I mean, for example, for any country that that we can follow, I guess. Thank you.
Well, let me answer one point about India. And this is a horrible legal answer which people will roll their eyes at. But please at least get the definition of gambling right. Because it's got to be absolutely clear what is actually being regulated, what is permitted and what is prohibited. Because that's part of the starting point in respect of somewhere like India, which in fact is permitting activities which might be perceived to be gambling activity in some, but actually everything else is intended to be prohibited, save at the provincial level. Harmen.
And what is GGR, right? Let's be very clear. The taxation, taken over total income versus GGR, absolutely ridiculous, kills everything, makes everything go underground. So, bad start. India is a very bad example. What we need to take as a good example, for example, is more, let's look at developing countries that are trying very hard, coming from a very difficult position. And sorry to say, but I think Colombia for Latin America has been a great example. Not perfect, by far, but a good example of what can be done, coming from a very large grey market, coming from existing machines on the floor, coming from having some casinos and nothing else. So I think there is not one answer of a country that has done everything right. I can give you an example of different laws of different, let's say, sectors within gaming, from sports to lottery to, casinos to machines, etc., etc. So it's a longer conversation.
Okay. And I'm afraid we could probably keep on. I think we're just starting to warm up. So I'm afraid we're going to have to close this session now. There are plenty more taking place, but if you have any questions for the panelists, please feel free to ask them directly. But before we go, please join me in thanking Michael, Harmen and Stan. Thank you very much.